Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the February edition of the Green Room. My name is Jeff Russell. I'm the president and CEO of Delta Dental, and I have the pleasure of hosting the Green Room. And one of the ways that I learn best is through dialogues with really bright leaders, often over a cup of coffee. And the Green Room was started back in the pandemic to have these in-depth yet informal conversations about topics that are important in the workplace and to work leaders. So today's topic is building an emotionally healthy workplace, what employers can do now. My guests today, I think, are two experts on this. Tammy Hoyman, CEO of Employee and Family Resources, who's a leading provider of EAP and other services, and Jami Haberl, who's the executive director of the Healthiest State Initiative, the home of Make It Okay. So for these past 3 years, we've tried to take these topics and curate things, again, on leadership and workforce, things that are interesting, that we are all dealing with on a day-to-day basis in business. And a few weeks ago, when we announced this, I posted on LinkedIn that I think this is probably the most important of the topics that we've covered in this 3 years. And I agree completely with that today. And I stand by that. And I think you'll enjoy this conversation. So prior to 2020, emotional health probably wasn't a topic that got a lot of resonance in a workplace. It certainly wasn't a hot topic in MBA curriculums 10 or 15 years ago. But during the pandemic, we found ourselves potentially in each other's living rooms and dining rooms with coworkers, as some of us went remote. And even for those that didn't go remote, it was a much more personal time. One of the things that I realized is that passing question that we asked each other, "How you doing today?" It can happen two different ways. It can be sort of that passing, "How you doing today?" Or it can be, "How are you doing today?" And I think that we really had this connection with folks, and we understood the importance of mental and emotional health and that for ourselves and in the workplace. And this impacts us every day, and it's also different by generations. My sense is that older workers may have a different perspective of emotional health in the workplace than maybe younger workers. Certainly my kids have a different relationship to that conversation than I might have had at their age. But regardless of this, I think we can be thankful that this conversation has entered our workplace and it's now becoming an important topic. So we're going to dive into this concept of workplace. And I will tell you that during this last quarter, what we in the benefits business might call open enrollment season, I heard more conversations about the importance of mental and emotional health on employers and on employees from my peers than probably of any topic this last year, and probably more than any time that I've heard that in history. So just one quick note, we were having this conversation with the panelists before. I'll probably use mental and emotional health interchangeably. I know there are clinical definitions of these things, but our goal always in this is to create a safe space where we can have an open dialogue to really address these issues. So let's dive into that. So we have two great resources to help with our conversation today. I'm going to introduce them both. First is Tammy Hoyman, who's the CEO of Employee and Family Resources, also known as EFR. We might refer to them as that. They are a leading provider of employee assistance programs and actually, like Delta Dental, a not-for-profit company. EFR provides a variety of mental health and substance abuse services, including counseling, prevention programs. EAP serves more than 500 employees nationwide. And Tammy holds her bachelor's and master's in social work from the University of Iowa as a licensed independent social worker. Jami Haberl is the executive director of the Healthiest State Initiative. I've had the pleasure of being on the board of HSI, whose goal really is that every Iowan has an opportunity to live their healthiest life. She joined Healthiest State Initiative in 2014, and her passion for health and wellness really started at a young age when her youngest sister was born with a rare metabolic disorder. She quickly learned the importance of health as she watched the challenges her sister had to have to endure her best life. So this passion has led her to a variety of different fields, and we're glad to have Jami. Jami is a proud native of Laurelville, Iowa. As Jami and I have traveled around the state, she mentions that often, and has her undergraduate degree from Iowa State and her master's in public health from Des Moines University. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me on the Green Room today. And to kick it off, maybe we'll start with Tammy and then go to Jami, but tell us a little bit more about your organization. I gave you a sense of that in the opening. And then if you looked at this from like a 30,000 foot view, the macro view for employers, what trends are you hearing around mental and emotional health? What things are you seeing employers think about? So Tammy, I'll turn it over to you. Oh, you may be on mute, Tammy.
Yeah.
All good.
There we go. You think I'd learned that by now. Okay, thank you, Jeff. It's so great to be here. This is a great opportunity for this conversation. Employee and Family Resources is a private nonprofit organization, as Jeff mentioned. We are headquartered in Des Moines, and since 1975, been providing employee assistance services to employees and employers nationwide. Currently serving about 500 employers nationwide, covering 250,000-ish employee lives, plus all of their family members. So, certainly we have the opportunity to reach a lot of folks. And I would say the trends that we are seeing in our field are an absolute uptick in demand for services. We're seeing this both on the employee and the employer side of things. I would say that the demand for our services increased several years ago, and the provider system has really been stretched for a long time, but the pandemic absolutely skyrocketed that. On the employer side of things, we're hearing from employers, they're concerned about what they can do to support their employees' mental health, and how does that get integrated into their business?
Great. Jamie?
Yeah, so the Iowa Healthiest State Initiative, we're a nonprofit organization, as Jeff said. And so we were started in 2011, really to work to improve that physical, social, and emotional well-being. We're rolling out a new mission and vision, really working to support creating that awareness and integrating solutions that support not only our physical and social, but I think really importantly, our mental well-being, which we are talking about today. So we oversee the Make It Okay campaign, which is an anti-stigma campaign. And I think, when we launched that in 2019, I don't know that any of us had the awareness that this campaign was going to be so critically important. The pandemic obviously brought to light that mental health, we all have mental health, and we all need to know how to be talking about mental health and supporting those with mental illness. And that's really what we continue to see over the last couple of years as workplaces have came to us asking for even just basic tools to how to have these conversations. I think one of the things I've reflected on, even myself and the generation that I live and grow up in, is that we didn't talk about mental health when I was a younger child like they do today, right? And so it's understandable that many of us don't have the resources or the tools to know, how do we have those conversations? And so that's really what we have seen a lot of workplaces asking for, just the basics. How do we get started? How do we understand to support our employees so that they can continue to be the best person that they can be, not only at work, but also at home? And so that's been exciting for us to see the acknowledgement that people want these resources and they do want to continue to support their employees, and that some of the simple tools that are available can help people move down that journey so that they have that best workplace opportunity for themselves as well as for their employees.
Great. Well, thanks. Good points. Let's maybe start with the basics. So Jamie, you mentioned the basics. I'll start with you on this. What are just the basic things in the Make It Okay toolkit, or that you think about in terms of how employees or how employers can support their employees' emotional health?
So a lot of the comments we get back after we do, so we have a Make It Okay presentation, and then we've provided that to a number of employers across the state. And a lot of the comments are it's really thought provoking. It makes us think about how we're having these conversations today. And I often think that the tools that we're providing seem very simple, right? They seem let's have empathy, compassion, how do we have these conversations? But when you think about, for many of the generations that are working today in the workforce, those conversations were never had prior to the pandemic. Or if they were behind very closed doors. You didn't bring the mental health conversation to your workplace. And COVID really, we had to bring that to our workplace because all of us have mental health, right? Every single one of us is good, it's bad, it's in between. There's things that happen throughout our lives that are going to impact your mental health and may impact a diagnosis of a mental illness, just like physical health. And so I think having some of those very simple tools help people understand, like, this doesn't have to be a hard conversation or a scary conversation, that it can be a conversation, just like if I shared with my board of directors that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, for example, right? Like, how do you support someone with a physical illness? We need to be doing the same with the mental illness. So I think that's what I've always liked about Make It Okay. It's really helped me, even personally, outside of just the work that I'm doing day to day with the Healthiest State, have conversations with friends and family members who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses, that I have more comfort in having those conversations. And I think that's where we all need to get, so that we can better be a better family member, a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, and definitely a coworker within all of our sectors.
And I think that's an important distinction that you make in the language. And sometimes, the language is just trying to learn these things. The difference between what is somebody's current mental health and if somebody has a diagnosis of an illness. And I think that's an interesting analogy. Tammy, thoughts about that? I mean, what are the basics that you're seeing from employers, just the table stakes that need to happen, and how that conversation has changed potentially in the last 3 years?
Yes, I agree with everything Jami said. And I think her point about make it okay is such an important message that for all of us. And that is one of the things that we really are encouraging with our customers, is make sure you have a culture in your workplace where it is okay to talk about mental health. What are you doing to eliminate stigma in how you deal with your employees? Is your workplace flexible for people to take care of themselves? Do you allow time for people to use the services of the EAP, or whatever service your employee is needing to support their mental health? Are you supporting the whole person? Are you asking the question about, going back to your opening comments, Jeff, how are you? I mean, how are you? How are you doing with your workload? How are you doing with your schedule? How are you doing with your kids in school and you being back in the office? Showing a genuine concern for how that person is showing up at work. There's the recent statistic I ran across from the American Psychological Association, saying that 81% of workers reported that they will be looking to work in a workplace that supports their mental health. That's something that
81%.
81%, yeah. So it's important. I mean, I think the pandemic, number one, made it okay to say, I'm struggling, I'm isolated, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, because we were all experiencing some level of that. So now, for better or for worse, people are talking about it. And I don't think employers have a choice other than to have those conversations.
Yeah, it reminds
me. And that's where I feel that so grateful that we're in this space, so that we can help to not just support the employees, but support those employers.
I was going to say, it reminds me, I said during the pandemic, when we were starting to talk more about this, it's not something they teach you at CEO school, right? This is not has not historically been that way. But I go back, maybe I'm going to date myself, but, when I was in high school, and I remember teachers saying, well, kids don't show up and learn the same way they used to learn back in the day. And that was frustrating. I think the education system has sort of understood that whatever the child that shows up is the child they need to be able to educate. And so how do they execute on that? I think that's now increasingly become, there was this wall, right? Come to work, show up, put on whatever face you needed to put on, whether it was a facade or not. And then that worked. I think now we have a little bit more integration, given the fact that, we were sort of thrown into each other's living rooms for some people who work remote. And that certainly is, changed the dialogue.
Absolutely.
So let's go maybe from the basics to the next level of best practice. So if you think about employers, you've seen workplaces, you've seen they create that psychological safety you were talking about, and maybe Tammy, we'll start with you and go to Jami. talk about what then is the next level. So if I'm on this, webinar today and it's like, yep, check mark. I think we've got that. I think we've got the basics. What's the next level I might want to think about going to?
Right. I think, I think you want to make sure that you have resources available to your employees as well as the leaders in your organization. So I think it goes beyond just, as you said, checking the box. Do we have an EAP? Well, take the deeper dive. What is our EAP providing? Is it full service? Is it easily accessible? Is it a robust service? How integrated are they with our culture at, in my company? That's one. I think looking at the tools available to your managers. Are you providing the kind of training and support that they need to have those conversations with employees? Are your policies in line with supporting mental health? I think having that conversation, what is our culture? What do my employees feel psychologically safe to talk about their mental health? I would say, as a CEO of EFR, I would love to say, oh, sure, of course, we have all of the supports in place and we're doing everything right. But I think I need to be honest and say, I need to look at that for our organization as well as every company that we serve. So I would really encourage those kinds of next steps or deeper dives.
And just to add to that, I think what's important is it's not just a checkbox, right? And so like both of you have said, I think about when we come in and we give a Make It Okay presentation to an employer. It isn't about just that 1 hour presentation that we're giving you the tools. You have to continue the conversation and you have to continue to embed the discussion, the language into everything that you're doing around health and wellness or the culture of your organization. Because there's a lot of, it can be easy to just, yep, check, we done it. We talked about mental health. We did the Make It Okay presentation. Moving on now to the next thing, right? But that's not genuine, and employees are going to know that and going to feel that. And I think it's also critically important to recognize that you need to have those continuous conversations, because there are events that happen in our everyday lives where you may need additional resources. For example, maybe you have a tragic death in your life, right? So you may need some additional EAP resources. But when individuals are at that point of that tragedy or the stress level has gotten so high, they may not even remember they have EAP available. So constantly reminding your staff, like, these are the resources we do have available. It doesn't have to be just after the pandemic, all of a sudden these are available. These are things that people should just be aware, like they're available 12 months out of the year. This is how you access it, constantly showing them that you have resources to support them for the time when they actually do need them, because we never know when any of us are going to need them. There could be some type of event that we need additional mental health support and or we need mental illness support, and we need to know where we can find those resources.
Yeah, I want to drill in a little bit on the sort of, this idea about proactive kind of health versus reactive. And there's a story that's pretty domain to our world around dental care. If you go back pre-World War I or right at the beginning of World War I, dental hygiene or oral health was actually a national security priority because it was so bad they couldn't find people to fight. And as recently as Vietnam, the Vietnam War military would have these brushing barns to make sure people were taking care of their oral health. And in our world, on the particularly dental side, three things kind of came together. The idea of this proactive, preventive, care at a dentist, at least once a year, hopefully twice. Fluoride, which happens to be more kind of a pharma solution in many water, and then dental insurance that paid for a piece of that. And so now you fast forward a generation, and the oral health index, while not perfect, I think in any stretch of the imagination, is so much better within that population. If we take that same analogy and think, okay, it's one thing if I have a toothache to go to the dentist, versus I'm going to get my regular preventive. Talk about what the trends you're seeing in the proactive nature of this, right? So I don't necessarily have a crisis. I don't maybe even have a tragic death like you were talking about, Jamie. What's the proactive nature of this, and how are you seeing employers start to change that narrative, especially as we have generationally a change in terms of, the stigma and the acceptance of reaching out for mental health providers?
I'll jump in and respond. I have recently come across some information from the World Health Organization, as well as a report from the US Surgeon General, all around recommendations they have for workplaces. And their focus is really exactly what you're talking about, Jeff, the proactive things that an employer can do. They acknowledge that a healthy workplace that supports the whole person can be a strong support for our mental health. On the flip side of it, if you have some of what they consider to be the risk factors of an unhealthy work site or workplace, you could be contributing to people's just poor mental health. I don't want to say an employer causes mental illness. That's not at all what I'm inferring. But, I think when you have, as a company or as an employer, when you have the right kind of supports in place, and they give a whole bunch of different examples in these reports, and I will provide the link in the for these resources in the follow-up email that will be coming to all the participants. But talking about what the culture is in your organization, are there underlying factors happening in terms of harassment or hostility? How are people's workloads? Checking in, what are people's work weeks look like? Having a 40-hour work week is incredibly important to me personally, as well as all of our employees. People need time to recover. And, I think proactively looking at all of those things as an employer, being very honest with yourself in terms of what you see in your workplace, where do you have work to do? I think those are some ideas. These reports give lots of great ideas. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that.
I think to add to that would be, we are, I think for so long we've separated our brain and our mental health from the rest of our body. And we can't function without our brain. And so thinking about your employee, which is the best asset you have in your organization, it's about their whole person, right? It's about how is their physical health, their financial health, their social health, their mental health, and how the workplace can help provide better opportunities to improve those spaces in our lives. We spend the majority of our time at work. And so I think just recognizing how we influence those different components of an individual's health and well-being, and what can we do to support that, and being honest and realistic about where can you make an improvements, right? So at the Healthiest State Initiative, probably everyone thinks, oh, all they do is eat fruits and vegetables. They do all this physical activity. I get this a lot, right? And it's like, we're not perfect either, right? And so but how can we be honest, and how can I even have conversations as a leader with my team to understand exactly what Tammy's talking about? Workload, how can I support them? Things that are also going on outside of work that may be causing some additional stress. Are there things that we can do as an employer? And I think a lot of that, in all honesty, stems back to having empathy, compassion for your employees, and setting expectations up front as to what you expect your employees to do, but knowing that you're there to support them. And I think a lot of that gets lost a lot of times in the workplace, because we have had such a mentality of there's a wall between, or a door between, when you walk into the workplace and when you're not at the workplace. And unfortunately, those are really blended. And it's hard for many people to leave work behind when they walk out of the office every single day. I know it's really hard for me, to be honest.
Well, as I was thinking, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to piggyback on that. I think Jamie mentioning expectations. that's one of the things that it shows up in both reports, is making the expectations clear to your employees. That doesn't mean that you let accountability go. It's really about that balance between the accountability and making clear what your expectations are of each employee in your organization. Another statistic that I ran across was that 84% of respondents reported at least one workplace factor that had a negative impact on their mental health. So, I mean, that's a big number.
Yeah.
So
I was going to go back to Jamie's comment about, separating brain health, if you will, brain from the rest of our body. I was thinking about this as we were preparing for that. I'm a runner. I purport to run. And if, a couple of years ago, I was training for a race and I tweaked my calf. And it didn't seem all that unusual to go to the physical therapist and have her work with me. And again, that was I'll call it a slight injury. But then the other piece that I thought was interesting is she's like, well, the reason it happens is because you run this certain way and you need to rethink about how you run and your mechanics and all those kinds of things. And I think there's that proactive nature to it, right? Sometimes it's a reactive component that leads us into that conversation. And then the question is how do we end up being proactive in terms of that? And, it'd be interesting if instead of thinking, okay, only when I had an issue should I talk with somebody, now I'm going to have a proactive, life coaching session, or I'm going to have a proactive mental health checkup. What might that look like if we were to be able to embed those things into employee benefit type of programs?
I think it'd be pretty amazing because we're a pretty reactive country in general and society as a whole when it comes to health. So anything we can do to be proactive and preventative, I think, is going to help a person's overall health and really help them, in all honesty, live out the best health that they can too. But we have a ways to go in that space.
I think that's a true statement. So two quick things. One, we have some questions coming out in the chat. Feel free to continue to do that. We'll take a look. We'll try and grab those as we can. The second, Tammy mentioned some resources. I know Jamie has some resources, and the email you get as a follow-up, as she mentioned, we'll make sure that you get all the links to that so that you have all those resources. You don't have to go scramble for all those statistics. So one of the questions was kind of the difference between kids who have gone through this quote unquote COVID schooling, as the question got asked, and adults. And maybe this is kind of to the provider network, just generally, not necessarily maybe through an employer, but what's the pathway for adults to get into this conversation? I mean, oftentimes the pathway for kids to get into that is through schools. What's the pathway for adults to be able to sort of raise their hand and say, either I need to go talk to somebody, I feel like I have an issue, or these sort of proactive kinds of things we were just talking about? Tammy, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I think there are definitely resources and there are pathways, certainly not enough. I think if mental health were handled more similar to how we think about dental care and our physical health, where we are doing those checkups routinely, we're going for whatever based on your gender, your age, your family history. I think, people treat it differently, mental health differently. I think encouraging friends, families, employees to identify what their support is going to be. Will it be is it a therapist? Is it a friend? Is it someone in the clergy? Is it a support group? And keeping that it's okay, and it should be okay. That is one of I've got my therapist on speed dial, and I know that I need to go in for regular checkups, whether there's something going on or not. It's just good to keep that up.
Jamie, any thoughts?
I mean, I think part of it is, I think the avenue you can use is obviously, like, if you have an EAP program, that's an avenue to consider. Obviously EAPs isn't like the end all be all for everyone either, right? And so like I often encourage people to even just contact their local primary care provider. They can help identify maybe where you are needing the support or assistance. And then the tool and resource that we encourage people to check out, just because it breaks it down since we work statewide by county, is Your Life Iowa. And that has additional resources based on where you live. And so let's say you live in Calhoun County, what are the mental health resources available to me versus what they are in Polk County versus Winneshiek County, just as examples. And so there can be other ways that you can just promote how to find those resources. And I think it can happen through the workplace, but I also think if you have the comfort level of having the conversation with friends or family members, they might have some recommendations or referrals as well. There's no, I think, one way to do it, just based on kind of the history over the last couple of years in this work.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And you mentioned kind of other resources. And one of the questions that we got in the chat was, are there other resources other than EAP that can be for employees? You mentioned one. I might take this one just interestingly, because we've been thinking here at Delta Dental about well-being in a much more holistic kind of way. So we often talk about physical, Jami, you mentioned the idea of emotional, financial, and others. We acquired a company called Caregiven late last fall that is really a digital app for informal caregivers. You can actually go to the App Store and get it right now. And what surprised me was that 1 in 5 Americans, soon to be 1 in 4 Americans, is an informal caregiver in some situation, whether it's a mom or dad, mother-in-law, father-in-law, nephew, whatever. And the amount of productivity drain that has, and the amount of emotional stress and toll that takes on an individual. As we were doing that, I was thinking back. My parents got COVID in the middle of all this, and it was not great for about 2 to 3 weeks. And thankfully, they're fine. But it was touch and go. And they live in Cedar Rapids, and I'm driving up to Cedar Rapids, and I just thought about what my productivity change was in that environment. So I think there are other opportunities that we have. Caregiving happens to be ours. It happens to be what we're thinking about, a little sliver of that. But I don't know if you have other resources around, pieces of this that might not just be kind of what I'll call primary care, that might be more specialty around this broad topic of mental and emotional health.
I guess I'll put a plug in for 211 and the 988. Those are both really great resources available to the public in identifying different kinds of services that are available, ranging from housing to financial support, consultation, mental health, substance use disorder support, all of the full range. I think those are great and very credible resources available to all of us.
And then, if I'm remembering right, the 988 program just really rolled out this last fall nationwide. Is that true?
Right. And it's the mental health, I think would be considered more like an urgent care line where you can call. I mean, obviously they can handle anything up to a very serious crisis, but if you are in a very serious crisis, either yourself or someone the emergency room is always going to be the best option. But I think that having these other resources available, it can certainly serve as a proactive resource.
Jami, you mentioned some resources that we'll make sure that we include in the links. Anything else that you're recommending to employers, beyond their EAP in terms of either resources or programs or how they think about it?
I think even we've seen some other workplaces kind of creating, I call them affinity groups, right? So groups that have special interests in certain topics, like, is that an opportunity within your own organization so that you have that people feel like they have the support internally, even as a work within that workplace too. Another great resource is NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And then I know that some people have talked specifically about local resources just here in Des Moines, but knowing that we probably have people across the state, I think always thinking about the healthcare services that do exist, but trying to find some of those other resources that maybe are outside of even just the healthcare side that can provide additional like family support is also useful.
Great. Well, so one of the things that I want to go back to is I think in an organization, in a workplace, the frontline manager, the supervisor is really kind of at the tip of the spear in some ways, right? Jami, what are you seeing in terms of what training or tools that do we need to make sure that we empower managers with so that they're able to have this, right? I think there's an interest in being empathetic, that, I think there's more conversation around it. And then there's also realization that, as a manager, I'm not a licensed healthcare, mental health professional. Talked about how managers, not only what tools, but how they sort of play with that, or, work in that boundary.
Yeah. So, I think part of it is as managers, I know in my career, I probably had never received any type of training on like how to even have a conversation around mental health or mental illness, right? Like you were just told to, kind of given more of the, I'm going to call old school way of like how you manage people. And I thankfully have evolved to get out of that old school way and not function that way, because I think when you are a manager, setting expectations is something so critical. So understanding that all of us have, some people may have physical disabilities, others may have mental disabilities, right? And so like, we all need to set expectations for our employees, regardless of what their ability or disability may be, and then making sure that you understand how that job can or could be impacted based on what that ability is, and what are the accommodations that you can make for that individual so that they can be successful in their own work and career journey, but also be successful for the organization. I think a lot of times we don't set clear expectations. And so then we get upset and we start to identify or blame, maybe because someone is dealing with or has a mental illness, or maybe has a physical illness even. And we use that as an excuse for why they're not actually getting to what you expect them to do, but we're very clear on what those expectations are, right? And so I think a lot of times we have to be very clear in our expectations, and we have to have those open conversations to understand what are the barriers to you achieving those expectations. And a lot of that is just having that human interaction, and really having empathy and caring to understand, but knowing that there are boundaries, that those expectations, if they aren't met with these accommodations, that may result in, some type of performance, or it may result in that person losing their position. But I think a lot of times expectations are not clear. And so it's understandable that many people then struggle with like, I don't even know what my expectations are. And if they're dealing with maybe a mental illness, they're going to struggle even more.
Tammy?
Yeah, I would say what we are hearing and seeing with our customers is they promote people into management positions, and most of the time it's somewhat reactive in terms of promoting somebody into that leadership role who's good at their job. That doesn't necessarily make them a good manager. I think we've all worked in enough places where that's a very common situation.
I've never done that, not once.
Right, exactly.
I think we've all done that.
Yeah. So so then you have managers who are struggling with how to manage people, and now we have this on top of it. So that is something that EFR is trying to respond to. We have a number of behavioral health trainings available on our website. You get a much better price when you're one of our customers with those, but our mission really is to continue to build those out to help to prepare those managers to understand what those mental health issues are, how to have those conversations. How do you create the culture that is ideal for high productivity, high presenteeism, low absenteeism, because we all know as business owners or folks in the running a business, retention is key, turnover is expensive, absenteeism is expensive, and when you have folks that are showing up not fully present, there's a big price tag to that too.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of work to manage people, right? And especially depending, because we're all different. All three of us are different, right? And then we all require different management styles. And so I think we got to provide the tools and resources so that they can succeed at their job, which then ripples down and helps whoever they're managing succeed. And I think part of that is giving them the tools to have conversations, and they're tough and awkward conversations to have that none of us want to have. But if we can give them the skills and the tools and the readiness, I think you're going to see success in your organization that you wouldn't see if you don't prepare your managers for what's to come when it comes to these conversations.
Right.
Well, and I think that that's the next, phase of kind of reducing the stigma in this conversation. So the first is, hey, maybe I'm not okay. The second is to be open and honest about, okay, what does that mean? Right. If I have a job requirement where I've got to lift 30 pounds and I sprain my wrist and I can't do that, at some point in time, there's a physical place where it's like, okay, you can do that. The idea of, entering into a mental or emotional health, whether it's a crisis or whether it's an episode, however you want to think about that, is slightly different. So Tammy, you mentioned early on in this conversation around this idea about accountability, and it was related to expectations. How can managers be empathetic, which I think people want to be, right? I understand it's important. I don't want to drive this conversation underground again, and still have accountability in this dialogue, much like we would do in other parts of health.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think maintaining that balance of expectations, making it very clear what we need you to do in your job, accountability. If you're seeing that those things are not getting done, you're addressing them in a timely manner, in a fair and balanced way. I see that you've missed another deadline, or I've noticed a pattern that you're not getting to work on time. This is one of the expectations of your role, And then I think a line that I have learned from our human resources director is there anything else that I need to know about this situation? Sometimes they'll say, oh, geez, I didn't realize I'd missed that so many deadlines. I'm on it. And sometimes there's just silence. And sometimes that can, just letting that silence, it might lead to more of a conversation. But I think just having is there anything else that I should consider? Because, you're really saying, I'm going to hold you accountable. And if there's anything else I need to know, please let me know. And, that's an opportunity for an employee to say, well, I'm going through a divorce right now, or my kids are, going through some health problems, whatever it is, gives that employee an opportunity to share, this is what's going on. Okay, is there anything that I, as your manager, can do to be supportive and helpful to you? Yeah, but bottom line is, we do have businesses to run. We have work that we have important work that needs to be done. You can do that compassionately as well.
Well, I think that is there anything else I need to know, and then how can I support you, while still not giving away the accountability of that, and and not doing that. I know, from my own experience, it's pretty easy to say, well, by supporting you, let me just go do that, right? And that's a different kind of accountability. I think we've all worked on over time. Jamie, thoughts on that balance?
I mean, I agree. And I think it has to be across all levels. So, if you're a larger organization like Delta Dental, I mean, there's multiple layers, right, within that, because you have multiple managers. So I've often said, it just because Jeff might promote it as the CEO, does that culture in those conversations really ripple effect down to the frontline people sitting in your call center, just as an example? And how can you make sure that those conversations and those skills are being really taught across all levels of management, that it can't just be, you need leadership buy-in. Tammy, Jamie, and Jeff need to also walk the talk, and, they need to lead by example, but you also have to make sure that those who are doing more of that direct supervision also understand how that culture can be built and the tools that they need so that they can be that best manager.
Yeah, totally agree. I think part of that ends up being this idea about, so there's one, I think as we go through this journey, there's this idea about, okay, now it's okay to talk about it, right? I can now, there's that you talked about that door, that wall you go through, and now it's okay to talk about it. Then what are the tools to proactively manage that, right? So from an employee perspective, from a maybe frontline manager, from a leader, and then how do you embed that in the culture? And to some extent, my sense of that is there's not a program for that, right? That's any more than there's a program to say, how do we have a collaborative work environment? How do we have an innovative work environment? I think it's really just a piece of how do you embed that in your culture as an underlying value to being able to get that done.
I think there are best practices. Yeah, I wish there was a program. I mean, I'd say, yeah, we're working on it. We kind of are working on it, but it's not going to ever be a one size fits all. But I think paying attention to what those best practices are, creating as much flexibility as possible for people to take care of themselves, making it a safe place to have the conversations about workload, about schedule, promoting lunch and learns on mental health topics, just the art that you have around the office. Is it, are you promoting AA groups, or, putting things around the office that acknowledge that these are valuable resources that any of us may want or need. And, I think and I keep going back to these articles because they nailed it. And it's concisely saying what we've been trying to do for 50 or 60 years here at EFR. So, there's just really, really good recommendations around building your culture that supports mental health, the whole health of your employees.
Yeah, and I agree. There isn't an easy program, but I think culture is going to look different for all three of our organizations, and it should, because our people are different within our organization. And so it's about engaging your people into what the culture they're looking to work within, and does that make sense as well, right? And so it isn't just this checkbox or like, I'm going to read this program and now this is going to change our culture. I mean, I think a lot of people wish it was that easy, or that we could do that. Oh, if they're doing that, we should do that here. You can take some of those, but if that's not, I mean, if it doesn't make sense within the premises of your mission, your organization, I mean, it's not going to work. I mean, people are going to be like, this is a joke. This isn't really our culture, because it's not true and authentic. And I think that's what culture is about, is true and authenticity. And it's engaging the people who truly make up your organization and are willing to provide input for what that culture should look like.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you joined the webinar with this idea that we were going to give you, the 4 things you had to go back and do, and here's the program, we're sorry. But I think that, it's just a complicated topic. One thing I was going to add to that, and Jamie, this is something that, I learned from you, is I had always thought about this idea of, the recommendation to walk or exercise, walk every 30 minutes every day was really about physical. And as we went into the pandemic and we do the statewide walk every year, part of that's about the mental aspect of that, right? So what's the mental aspect of being able to get 30 minutes of activity every day? And I think that really shows where these things are so integrated that you can't just put them in silos and buckets. So.
Yeah. And then the social aspect of that too, right? The opportunity to have social conversations as you're walking. I mean, so it's, everything kind of intertwines, but we often like to compartmentalize it when we really shouldn't be.
So we've got a little bit of time left. If people have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. But while we're waiting for those, one of the questions is, what innovations are you seeing in this world? Obviously, sometimes in a crisis, we come up with creative and innovation that spans long after the crisis has left. And Tammy, maybe I'll start with you on this one. What innovations have you seen around this whole concept of mental and emotional health, and whether it's delivery mechanisms or programs or those types of things?
Right. Well, I'd say that the common use of telehealth during the pandemic has been a game changer. It is not going away. It's turned out to be a very effective and a very popular means of counseling, as well as lots of other kinds of healthcare services. I would say that there is a greater demand for technology. I'd say especially with our younger generations, they want to connect on a platform. They want to receive service in their time. So, I think that is also one of the innovations. What is your app doing? What podcasts are available? What is available outside of the realm of counseling? I think the use of coaching is also has become a lot more popular. It's, we all need a little coach. I mean, we're willing to have a coach or a trainer at the gym. How about a life coach? You don't have to be in a mental health crisis to benefit from that. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're seeing and what we're hearing from employees and employers is we really need access when we want access in the ways that we want access. So paying attention, generational, as Jami mentioned, different industries. When we're working with a company that employs truck drivers, that's a lot different than an employer, an insurance company, that it's pretty much night and day. So, I mean, we're still dealing with people, but their realities are so different.
It's a pretty exhaustive list. Jami, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to add what Tammy said, I've seen some more work in looking at how to use virtual reality on some of these. I think it's very new space, but I think it's something, especially when you look at the different generations or you look at different industries and how do you reach them. Trucking industry is a great example of where they're starting to look at like how could they use some type of virtual reality, because what are they doing? They're sitting behind in a truck for hours on end. And so you have to deliver mental health services in a different way, or even just health and well-being services in a different way. And I think telehealth, COVID really pushed us to move forward faster on that. And I think that's provided a lot of great opportunity for increasing access, especially in rural parts of our states. And I think that will continue to evolve. And I agree with Tammy, that's not going away. And I hope it doesn't go away because it has really provided a new opportunity for people that don't have the time, the energy, and maybe even the transportation to travel 2 hours to a place that has mental health providers.
I think especially in a rural state and generationally, I think about my daughter, and if I FaceTime her, I might as well be right in front of her if this is the idea, right? I mean, I'm not sure cognitively she actually sees a difference between me in 3 dimensions and me on that phone. And I think that, there's value. I mean, in this kind of scenario we're in now, I've noticed even our employees in certain situations are more free to talk about what they really think, not necessarily about these issues, but about just generally issues. It's a lot easier potentially to talk to a camera than it is if somebody's, face to face with you. So I think those, we're going to see tons of innovation, I think, come out of this, where how do we leverage the value of technology, not only for access rural to urban, but also generationally, and your point about, kind of when I want it. So we're good. Well, we are coming up on the end. I was saying one of my stories that I tell or analogies that I use here that we talked about in a variety of different ways, but if you think about kind of your capacity to sort of withstand, issues and stress and those things is a 55-gallon drum. And I take a cup of water and I pour 1 cup of water into an empty 55-gallon drum. It splashes a little bit on the bottom and it's not a big deal. But if I fill that 55-gallon drum all the way up to the very, very brim and I throw that same cup of water, it kind of splashes all over everything. And so we talked a lot, certainly during, the time that we were more remote, about, finding ways to empty that drum, right? So you have capacity. So let's ask you, and Jami, I'll start with you. What's your way of emptying that drum? How do you take care of yourself from a mental and emotional health perspective? What are some tips and tricks that work for you?
Well, I definitely enjoy working out. So physical activity is definitely something over the course of my life, to be honest with you, I know reduces my stress. But the other thing that I've really learned to find a passion for, that I think was sparked because of COVID, because I needed to use my hands, was I started making sourdough bread, and I continue to make it still today. And my husband will laugh about that if I'm in there kneading my bread, he knows that I need some time to decompress. And so finding new ways, because I've always done physical activity prior to COVID, so this wasn't anything new. That's just been kind of a natural for me. It was always my kind of level setting, but I needed to find some other ways to kind of maybe reset after some of those challenging days. And I really found a lot of passion in doing something with my hands. And then also lots of friends and neighbors have benefited from the sourdough baking over time, because I can't eat that much, but I love to make it a lot. So that's also added an extra joy, because not only am I making and creating something from the sourdough starter, but then I'm also providing that as a kind of a gift, a token of thanks, and it's brought together some new friendships and some community, which is to me all important and to my overall health and wellness too.
Tammy?
I wish I had something that was even half as interesting as that, but I don't. I would say I don't have like a secret sauce to this, but I would say a 40-hour work week is essential. Good rest is essential. I drink a ton of water. I try to keep diet and exercise in mind. And I know that's kind of cliche, but I'm saying that really in terms of my mental health. I can tell when I've fallen off the wagon and all I've been eating is junk. My mental health is different, or I can tell when I haven't been on the exercise bike enough. Those are things that are really important to me. Connections, making sure that I am connecting socially. Even during the pandemic, I was one of those people that were doing Zoom get-togethers, Zoom game, making sure that, like everyone else, it took a while to figure it out. But, and then I have to, put in a plug for counseling and therapy. It's something that I just routinely do, just like I have to go in every 6 months to get my teeth cleaned. I have to go in and kind of do my mental health checkup, and then using that resource when my tank is especially empty.
Well, I think the point of that, and thank you for sharing it, it's different for everybody, right? I think the point is you've got to figure out what your way to empty the drum is. So, well, let me first say thank you. I apologize. There were a couple of questions we didn't have a chance to do. 2 follow-ups. The first is that you'll get an email after this that has all of the resources. There was a question about where did the 81% statistic come from. We'll make sure we get that into the follow-up email. You'll also get with that a survey to give us feedback. We'd love to hear what kind of topics. This has probably been one of our most attended series, and I think it's a really important topic. But what other topics are burning in your mind that we really should cover? That's our goal in this, is to kind of let you in with the great guests like Tammy and Jami with that. So with that, again, Jami, Tammy, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciated all of your insight. This was being recorded. We'll make sure we send that out if people want to have a chance to go back and get that. And have a great day. For those of you in the Midwest, it is a sunny day in at least Des Moines, and we're almost through winter. Hopefully the groundhog tomorrow won't see a shadow, and we'll get spring early. So thanks so much and have a great day.